All right, we're in business. So I know that we have done some fetch stuff, but give me an idea of what questions you have about fetch, and we'll get them answered. Shout them out, throw them in chat, whatever. Katie, what's on your mind?
I was kind of wondering how getting the response, like writing that out, I guess, like I don't know.
Handling responses. Okay. Give me some more. What else are we like not all the way confident on in fetch?
The methods that we can use that we can call on the response, like the
What methods we can use. Love it. What else?
I kept having a problem where I could get my slash heroines to return that page, but then when I wanted to get my slash powers page to come, it would give me back the heroines page for some reason.
So that might be an issue of different scripts.
Yeah, maybe.
That would be my guess. What else? Let's start here and see where we get. Anybody have an API endpoint that they've been playing around with, they want us to use? Preferably a public one.
That's the one from
Love it.
last.
Oh, this makes me so happy. Friend of the school, Kim Schlesinger, made this API.
Oh yeah, she can do that.
Yeah, she's one of your speakers. So let's make, call this Stranger Things Playground. And you do not need to follow along with this. Stranger Things Playground. All right, so I'm going to make an index.html. I'm going to make an app.js. And then I'm going to serve them up. Cool, they're being served. And I'm going to go into that index.html file and sketch out an HTML doc. Cool. It needs a title. It needs a char set. And let's make sure we have something actually showing up on the page. All right, cool, we're in business. So first thing that we need to talk about is attaching this script tag. So if I do something like this, this will totally load up. I can go over into this. I can console log something in here, and it's going to show up in my console. Cool. And then absolutely nothing that I do is going to work. And I'm going to be super confused. I'm going to lose half an hour on the code challenge. Why?
You haven't fetched it, so it won't show up on the actual.
But like, that's the thing that's not going to work. I'm going to fetch the stuff. I'm going to write syntactically perfect JavaScript, and nothing is going to show up on the page, and I'm going to feel like I'm going crazy.
Doesn't the script need to be in the body so the HTML can load first?
Yep. So your browser reads these pages top to bottom. So it'll go, all right, HTML, so we're using the HTML doc type. All right, it's an HTML5 app. HTML, got it. All right, head. So this is stuff that shouldn't show up on the page. You want to name it Stranger Things? Awesome. I'll put it in the tab. This is the character set we're using. Got it. Oh, cool, an app.js file. I'm going to go through this top to bottom. But what's going to happen is we're going to fetch, we're going to try to make elements out of these things and add them to the page. And your browser is going to go, what page? Because we haven't gotten to the body yet. So there's two solutions to this. Who can tell me what they are? Todd gave us one. We can just put this down to the bottom of the body.
Defer.
Defer! So we can also do that, and that works too.
What is defer again?
Defer is before you try to run this script, wait until the page finishes loading. It's just a keyword that we can put in our script tags.
Is there a benefit to doing that, or as opposed to putting the script tag in the body?
So this is the way that, like, I've done it for 15 years, and so old habits die hard and all. Defer is relatively new, but the thing that I like about it is that the head is supposed to be for things that don't show up on the page, you know, like JavaScript. And so it feels like it's more semantically appropriate to put it there than in the body, but they both do literally the exact same thing. More questions so far? Cool. So what I'm going to do is, see, this is a collection of characters. So I'm going to make a UL and give it a class of characters. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through the steps that I would need to add all of those characters to this page. I'm going to go kind of quick, but then we can go all the way back through it. We can go over it slow. But if I want this, I'm going to fetch this URL. And then as soon as the response comes back, I'm going to parse it as JSON. And then I'm going to take the parsed response, and even give that a different name, parsed response. And then, let's see, so this has a key called data, and it's an array. So the characters are in parsed response dot data, yeah, just like that. And then I want to turn each of these characters into a list item. So I'm going to map over them. And then for each one of these, I'm going to make a list item. And then I'm going to set its inner HTML to h2 character name. Is that it? Yeah. And then I'll put their phone number on here also. Character dot phone. And then maybe we can put a paragraph under that that has whatever this message is. Character dot message, and they had an image also. Image URL. Character dot image URL. And even though we're just in a lesson right now, there's no reason to not make it accessible. So let's add an alt tag. Character dot name. Cool. So, and then if I return that li, I've turned this array of characters and turned it into an array of list items. Easy. And then for each one of those list items, I want to add them to the page. So I'll say for each list item, we'll say characters is document.querySelector dot characters. This is that UL that we made out here. So for each character, we append the li. And dun da da da, there we are. That is all the steps that we need to fetch a resource, make DOM elements out of it, add them to the page. So let's roll way back and start getting some questions going about this.
Can you discuss inner HTML versus inner text?
Yeah. So a couple different ways I could handle this. If I do something like li.textContent equals character.name or something, that's legit. It's not too terribly different if I make that inner text instead. However, if I make this inner text, this isn't going to work. Any guesses why?
Because we're trying to perform something with what you have after it.
Oh, you're like so close. That's like 70% of the way there. It's not that I'm performing something really.
Is it interpolation?
Nope, all the interpolated values are going to show up, kinda.
You have HTML tags within
Yeah,
value or like
that's it. So what I said is I'd like the text of this to be these HTML elements. And so when I go to the page, it's showing that literal text. The browser isn't interpreting it at all.
As text.
Exactly. So when I change that to inner HTML, it goes, oh, I'm supposed to parse it as HTML. Got it.
Okay, thank you.
That's the difference. What else?
So at the top with the cons characters,
Mm-hmm.
so that's where you relate it to the HTML file.
Correct. It's getting that element out of the HTML and then I can add things to it down here. Might make it more clear if I put it here, but the reason that I didn't do this is every time it goes through this for each loop, it's re-looking up that character's UL. That's kind of wasteful. So if we put it outside of that, it only gets looked up once. But yeah, that is exactly what's relating this to our original HTML document. Now, something that I want us to be kind of clear on though, so I have an HTML file and I give it to a browser. And your browser, you can think of it kind of like digests it. It's a set of instructions for the browser on like how to structure something. And when it digests it, it shits out a thing called the DOM. Once it's done that, there is no HTML anymore. The HTML was like the original instructions on how to build the DOM. And one of the things that makes this kind of confusing is we can element inspect stuff, right? And we element inspect that, and that looks like HTML. It actually recreates the HTML to show you that view of it. So when I pull open the console, it's like re-HTMLing the DOM. That's why we can do things like add shit to it. We didn't add stuff to the HTML, we added stuff to the DOM. It's a very subtle distinction, but I think it'll help your mental model about like why we're able to add and remove stuff from the page, even though we're not adding and removing anything from the HTML.
So you're referring to like appending stuff. If we were to append something, it does that to the DOM only and not
Correct.
to our HTML file.
Exactly. Cool. There was a question about this step. What's happening here? So when we take this response, what we get back is a raw response. So actually, let's take a look at that. There's some cool shit in there. So if I write this out as like one of these and return the arrow function, the body of the arrow function, let's take a look at what we have on this response object, because there's some kind of cool shit in there. Hey, check this out. So we have all of the response headers that we got. We got whether or not we got like a 200 or 300 series response code. We know whether or not we were redirected. We get our actual response code. We get the response text. We have the original URL that we asked for. That's some like kind of neat stuff. The other thing that we get is we get some of these functions, including this one. So what this is telling us is that response that I got, how should I try to interpret that? Because we don't have to send back JSON. We could send back binary stuff, like images. We could send back a stream of data. So it's not just like some characters, it's like continuing to go. And so the browser wants you to make a decision about how it should try to interpret it. And so since we're sending back JSON, we call this JSON method. Important thing that you need to understand about this in mod 3 is it's not turning it into JSON. It is JSON, we're turning it into a JavaScript object. It is JSON, we're turning it into a JavaScript object. It is JSON, we're turning it into a JavaScript object. Cool, ask me some more questions.
Could you also say that like we're parsing from JSON?
Yep, absolutely. That is a correct use of all of those words. Another one that you are, I wouldn't say highly likely to, but it's still a little common. Just interpret it as text. So don't try to turn it into a JavaScript object. Don't try to do any magic to it. Just give me the raw text data. So if for whatever reason we weren't using a JSON API, I just needed to get back some missive to add to the page that I could just interpret as raw text. Give me a question. I love questions.
So somewhere in our response, does that hold like all the objects somewhere? Like, I don't know, when we look at it in the console, it looks like
Sure.
a bunch of different.
So let's sketch this out. So my client, which in this case, it's the browser. When I say client here, I'm referring to the browser. So here's the API. I make the fetch request, and I go, yo, give me some contacts. And then the thing that it gives me back is a string. This is critical. So these arrows here, this is just going over the network. The network doesn't know HTML, it doesn't know JPEG, it doesn't know JavaScript, it doesn't know shit. There are no data types, there aren't Booleans, there aren't numbers, it's just characters that it's sending. This computer understands a lot of those things. This computer understands a lot of those things. While it's in transit though, it's just beeps and boops. So I send back these characters that look like whatever. And then it's the client's job to take those characters and turn it into something that it understands. So if I follow the rules for correctly formatted JSON, my client can grab the JSON and go, oh, I know how to turn this into JavaScript objects. That's useful. But they're not objects until they get to the client and have been parsed. That's exactly what's happening on line 7 here. Katie, does that answer your question?
Yeah, that does.
Cool. What else?
What is the first response about data?
This and this. So the raw response looks like this. In fact, I think I can make it uglier. Oop. Pretty print. All right. So this is the thing that it sent me back. It's just some characters. But I can see that it has two top-level keys, status and data. And data is equal to this array. And that array is my characters. So what I did is I took my response, I grabbed the data key, and said that I'm calling that characters. I don't actually have to do that. I was just trying to be illustrative. I could have also said parsed response dot data dot map. That would have worked too. But the data isn't special. It's just what that API happens to call that key. It's not a magic property though or anything. What else?
So for the LI part where you're writing all that on line.
These?
17,
By the way, pause real
yeah,
quick. So the reason the numbers look weird in my text editor, they're called relative numbers. So the one that I'm on is the one that's the actual number. That's 21. And so where this highlighted block starts is 4 up from 21. So that's how you would read that. Just heads up.
Okay.
Continue.
So there you're creating like the part in the HTML where it has like li within the UL, right?
Mhm.
Is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so let's take a look at what that gets turned into. So all I wrote in the HTML is this UL right here. That's it. These LIs and everything inside them, that's what I made with the DOM. That's what's happening on these lines.
Okay, so if you wanted to do more of those LIs,
Mm-hmm.
like, would you name each one LI or?
Sure, so this is happening in a loop.
Yeah.
So this scope right here, that only exists for that iteration of the loop.
Okay, yeah. So I gotcha. So if I mapped characters again for something else, then
Exactly.
okay.
And like in practice, because we can do that, it's pretty common to like this is response. All right, well you can call this response too. There's no reason you can't. Since they're different functions, we can reuse the same shit and just willy-nilly.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Cool, more questions?
What's the backtick on 4 down from 7?
Beautiful. So the backticks are needed to do this string interpolation that I'm doing here. If I make those double quotes, watch what happens here. Okay, so I made them double quotes. Oh, womp womp. Nothing worked. Probably got barked at a little bit too. Unescaped line break. It's a crime. If I even put them all in the same line like that. Aw, it doesn't understand any of this. So by using backticks, we can do just like we did in Ruby, except it's $ instead of hash. So that was what it was in Ruby. It's $ in JavaScript. But we can make a string with variables in it. It's called string interpolation. But it only works inside of backticks.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So if I have an index and a show being used by like say the heroines, and then because you can't have files with the same name,
Mm-hmm.
so for like if I have powers HTML and like show powers, do I have to go and is that what my routes have to be called? Because you,
So let's play with that a little bit. So I want to have more than one page now. Katie, do you happen to know if there's another endpoint that's live on that API? Is this the only one? I think it might be.
I'm not sure.
I think Christine is who gave that.
Oh, Christine, sorry. Do you know offhand if there was another endpoint in that? I don't think there is. All right, let's do Pokemon.
No, I don't.
Do Pokemon API. All right, so
Great
what
API.
was that?
I said this is a great API.
It's a great API. So for this one, we're going to have a second page. So that one was my index. I'm going to make Pokemon.html, and I'm also going to make Pokemon.js. And for my Pokemon HTML, I'll just copy all of this over, and I'll call that Pokemon. I'll call this Pokemon. All right, so if I try, actually, if I keep that the same, and over here I just add a link to that. Let's link it over to Pokemon.html. So if I do this, any predictions on what's going to happen?
On your browser, it'll have a link for this Pokemon, this new HTML and all that they're making.
Yep. And what's going to happen when I click on it?
Nothing will be there yet.
I don't think that's quite it. Any other predictions?
It'll have all the same character info.
Exactly. It's going to have all the same shit on it, even though it says Pokemon. Why?
Because you still reference the same class.
Not the same class. That's kind of part of it. Exactly. I'm pointing to the same file. So if I make that Pokemon.js, all of a sudden, they're not loading up anymore. So maybe I call that Pokemon, and nothing in this file. But this is the key takeaway I want you to have from that part of it. There, if you want different behavior on different pages, you need a link to different files. But check this out. I can do a lot of the same shit. Like, what happens if I just get a list of Pokemon? Perfect. So, if I do HTTPS pokeapi.co/API/v2/Pokemon. Is that it? Yeah. It's almost like I've used this API once or twice. I take the response, I parse it, and then with that response, with my parsed response, these are the things that I'm going to see on there. I want the results. So I'll say that the Pokemons are response.results. I can take my Pokemons and kind of works the same way. I don't actually have all that much stuff available from this response. It's really just the name of the Pokemon and then a link to where you can get more. So I'll say Pokemon.name, yeah. And that's it. And then I'll return the li, and for each one, append them to the page. And, Pokemon's null. You're null! Oh, I have to update that too. Cool. And there's a whole bunch of Pokemon. So I got those, I got those. But they need to be different scripts. If I try to link to the same script file on every page, it's going to try to do the same thing on every page.
So the consequence is you're essentially creating 2 pages, one for the heroes and 2 for powers.
Exactly. Cool. More questions?
Will you go back to your HTML file really quick?
Yeah. So we've talked about that.
I'm confused on why there isn't two script tags if you were saying you have to have two different JavaScript files.
Sure. So I'm currently on the index.html page, and I'm using app.js as the script file for that one. The Pokemon page is a completely different page, and it links to its script file.
Okay, so you have two HTML files and two JavaScript files.
Correct.
Okay, and the Pokemon index file is connecting to the Pokemon JavaScript file.
Correct. Let's talk real quick about what indexes are. So the index is what happens if you don't specify anything. If you go to google.com, what Google server will interpret that as is like, I know what you meant. You didn't say it, but I know that you meant google.com/index.html. That's why when I go to localhost 3000, I don't have to do localhost 3000/index.html. It just infers it. You can think of it like a default.html. So in our site, you have an app.js and an index.html and a pokemon.html and a pokemon.js. Could probably rename that app.js to index.js. Probably make more sense.
If you didn't have an index.html file, would that be like a 404 if you just typed in as a name?
Let's see. So, all right, right now, this is what I have in this folder. If I change index.html to otherfile.html, now I don't have an index.html anymore. So, if I go to this site, cool. What happened over here on the network? A 404. You correctly predicted it. Well done. And if I move that back, pew pew, back in business. What else?
Yeah, I was linking to the wrong JS file, which is why it was giving me the same thing back.
There you go. It's almost like I've done that once or twice before. Remember, every time you make a mistake, that is like building up your internal library of things that can go wrong. Like,
I get fail better.
exactly. That's really the difference between like a senior engineer and a newish engineer is you just screwed up more times, have a bigger Rolodex of what a problem is.
Teachers work too.
More questions?
Can you go back to your JS file?
Yeah. Which one?
Either one.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, one question. When you're appending at the bottom, is there ever a case where you'd want to do like the UL? Like if I had multiple LI, like I was talking about, would you do append UL? Sorry, I don't know if that's coming out of my mouth right.
That's fine.
I was just watching the module 2 overview, and you did ul.append with dog.
Oh, sure. I could also do something like this. Just change that.
Oh, okay, so that's just the
That does literally the exact same thing. Or I could make that, this is probably better if I do it like that.
Okay. So it's just whatever you.
They're just names.
Yeah. Okay.
So if you want to get, say, something from another page to list on a different page, you have to make a new fetch request.
Yep. So HTML is stateless. And what that means is two pages don't know anything about each other. They don't remember what data was there. They don't remember anything. And so they are completely independent from each other.
Okay.
We have a couple different ways we can hack around that. One of them we'll do in Mod 4, and that's there's only ever one page load. You just take things in and out of the DOM and make them look like different pages. That's why those are called single page apps. It's not because there's only like one view on it or something. It's that the page only loads one time. And since like it's all just smoke and mirrors that make it look like different pages, we can totally share data there. We can also do things like local storage, which will let us attach data that's to a domain rather than a page. And so everything you go to on that domain will have access to the same like a cookie jar kind of thing. Couple different ways we can get around that, but by and large, pages aren't supposed to know anything about each other.
Okay.
Cool, what else?
Random question, but is fetch built into JavaScript or is that from somewhere else?
That's a fascinating question, actually. It is not built into JavaScript. It's built into HTML. So where this like bizarro piece of trivia will come in handy for you is that Node is in a different language. It's still just JavaScript. It's a way to run JavaScript outside of a browser. The same way we did with Ruby, where you just type Ruby and then the name of a file on a command line. You couldn't do that with JavaScript until pretty recently. So somebody ripped the JavaScript part of a browser out of the browser and just made it an independent program. That's called Node. That's what that is. But there's some things that don't come along with it. Like, for example, there's no document.create element because just on your command line, there's no elements. There's no document. Anything that's part of window, there's no window. It's just your command line. So there's some stuff that like isn't available in Node. One of those, fascinatingly, is fetch. Because fetch is from a completely different committee than the committee that works on JavaScript. So it is part of the HTML spec, is that browsers should all have fetch built into them. It's pretty new too. It's like 5 years old. What we did before that sucked ass. It was really gnarly. There's this thing called XHR. Let's see if they have an example of what these stupid things look like. Yeah, it was stuff like this. You have to test for its existence because it was pretty new at one point also. And then you'd have to use the constructor to make a new copy of it, and then you'd have to open up a request, and then you'd have to send the request, and then you'd need to close the connection. And so like all that fetch stuff used to look like this. It was so fucking bad.
I like fetch better.
Fetch is a massive upgrade on that entire thing. Now, another kind of interesting point is that there are alternatives to fetch also. Probably the most popular of those is called Axios. So Axios is pretty cool because of a couple things. For one, the syntax is a little bit cleaner. For example, you don't, there's no separate parsing step. You just don't have to do that. Also, your methods are exposed as methods on Axios. So we'll talk about it in Mod 3, but when we're doing other kinds of requests, the syntax is a little bit more verbose. So a couple cool things like that. Another thing that is cool about Axios, and the reason that I end up using it on most of my projects instead of Fetch, is you can intercept requests and responses. So where that becomes handy is when you're testing something. You're testing something, you don't want to actually make a network request. Like if that were the case, you couldn't work on a plane. They're also slow as hell. It's the slowest part of any app. And so if I have 5,000 tests and each one of them needs to make a network request, that test suite's going to take forever to run. But if I can intercept the request as it's going out and then just immediately respond with what I know that server's going to give me back, now I'm no longer testing that the network connection works. I'm testing that my logic works. You can't really do that with Fetch, and it's really easy to do with, well, it's not really easy. It's kind of easy to do with Axios. Canceling requests, that's kind of a neat one. Let's say you're asking for the same data from 3 different sources. You don't care which one, whichever one comes back fastest is fine. And so you get one of them back and you can cancel the other 2 requests. So it's a more richer set of options than Fetch, but Fetch is, yes, built into the browser. And that was my very convoluted answer to your very simple question.
Thank you.
Cool. What else? You guys are my best friends, thick and thin, we'll always be together, we're 8 of a kind, palling around, having fun all day, laughing away, best friends are we. Cha! Have a good lunch, everybody.